The elevator jerked hard and then dropped just enough to steal the breath from her chest before slamming to a stop between floors, lights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to stay alive. Her coffee splashed onto the marble tiles, and for a second, all she could hear was her own heartbeat. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and how old are you? And let me ask you something. If you were trapped in a broken elevator with a stranger who knew nothing about your real life, would you tell the truth? Or would you finally feel free enough to lie? She pressed the emergency button, once, twice, like maybe the third time would change reality. It didn't. The elevator stayed silent. Then she noticed him. He stood calmly in the corner, tall but slightly stooped, gray hair neatly combed, hands resting on a worn leather briefcase like it was an old friend. He smiled, not the forced kind, but the kind that says, "We'll get through this." "Looks like we're neighbors for a while," he said. His voice was steady, comforting in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her name was Clara Whitman, though nobody in this elevator needed to know that Whitman Industries sat under her signature. In this moment, she was just Clara, a woman in her late 50s wearing a simple coat she'd bought specifically to look ordinary. She laughed softly, more from nerves than humor. "Guess so," she replied, stepping away from the control panel. "I'm Clara." He nodded. "Henry. No last name." She noticed that right away. The building was one of those glass towers downtown, all mirrors and money, the kind of place where people rarely looked each other in the eye. Clara had come here on purpose, not for business, but for something much riskier. Love, or at least the possibility of it. After 2 marriages that ended the moment money entered the conversation, she had promised herself one last try. Undercover, quiet, real. No assistants, no drivers, no clues. Henry leaned back against the wall as the elevator hummed weakly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, surprised by how much the simple question meant. "I hate tight spaces," she admitted. "And surprises," he chuckled. "At my age, surprises are all I've got left." That line made her curious. If you were listening, you might have leaned in right there too. Minutes passed. The air felt warmer. Clara loosened her scarf and noticed Henry fanning himself with a folded document. "Long day?" she asked. He sighed. "Long life," he said, then smiled again like he didn't want to weigh the moment down. "I was heading to a meeting I didn't really want to attend." She raised an eyebrow. "Those still exist?" He laughed, genuinely this time. More than ever. She found herself talking, the way people do when they think they'll never see each other again. She told him she worked in consulting, that she lived alone, that she'd learned how lonely success could be even when you pretended you didn't care. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, eyes kind. When she finished, he said, "Sounds like you've spent a lifetime being strong for everyone else." The words landed heavier than she expected. Nobody ever said that to her. Henry shared less. He said he was retired in theory, that he lived modestly, that he believed people showed you who they were when nobody was watching. "Especially when money's involved," he added. Clara swallowed. If he only knew how close that truth sat to her heart. The elevator jolted again, harder this time. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Clara's breath caught, and without thinking, she reached out. Henry's hand met hers instantly, warm and steady. "I've got you," he said softly. In that dark, with no titles and no bank accounts, she believed him. Time stretched. Clara felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope mixed with fear. She wondered what Henry would think if he knew the truth. If you were in her place, would you confess? Or would you protect this fragile, honest moment a little longer? A voice crackled through the intercom. "Maintenance here. We're working on it." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by disappointment she couldn't explain. Henry squeezed her hand once before letting go. "Looks like our time's almost up," he said. Funny how the most real conversations happen when you can't escape. The lights flickered back on. The elevator began to move, slow and shaky, descending toward the lobby. Clara's heart raced. She didn't want this to end like every other almost in her life. As the doors prepared to open, Henry adjusted his jacket and picked up his briefcase. "Clara," he said, hesitating, "if you'd like to continue this conversation over coffee sometime." He didn't finish the sentence, just waited. The doors slid open to reveal a crowd of worried employees, and at the front of them, a young executive rushed forward, eyes wide with relief. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, voice shaking, "we've been trying to reach you. The board is waiting upstairs." Henry's expression changed, not panicked, but revealing something carefully hidden. Clara froze as the executive added, "We can't run the company without you, sir." The words hung in the air like a dropped glass that hadn't shattered yet. Clara's mind raced as Henry's grip tightened around his briefcase, knuckles whitening just a little. "I told them I'd be a few minutes," he said calmly to the executive, his voice suddenly carrying a quiet authority that made people straighten without realizing it. "Everything's fine." The young man nodded, clearly relieved, and stepped back. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her, not from the elevator this time, but from the realization blooming in her chest. Grandpa CEO, that's what he was. And somehow, in the dark between floors, she had missed it completely. They stepped out into the lobby together. People stared at Henry with respect, some with awe. No one looked at Clara twice. For the first time in years, she was invisible again, and strangely, it hurt. Henry turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Coffee?" he asked again, softer now, like he wasn't sure she'd still say yes. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They walked 2 blocks to a small cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. No assistants followed, no cars waited. They sat by the window, steam rising between them. "I should probably explain," Henry said, breaking the silence. "I run a company, have for decades. These days they call me the CEO, but mostly I feel like the janitor of other people's expectations." Clara smiled sadly. "Funny," she said. "I know that job well." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. That restraint made her chest ache. She took a breath, feeling the weight of her own secret pressing down harder now. "Henry, I didn't tell you everything either." Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "I didn't come to that building for work. I came because I was tired of being seen for what I own instead of who I am." He leaned forward, listening the way he had in the elevator. "Go on." "I'm not a consultant," she said quietly. "I'm a billionaire." The word felt ugly on her tongue. She waited for the familiar reaction, shock, calculation, the subtle shift in posture. Instead, Henry laughed softly, not mocking, just human. "Well," he said, "that explains the calm under pressure." She blinked, surprised. "You're not angry?" He shook his head. "I spent my life hiding my title just to be treated like a person. Sounds like you did the same." Something broke open between them then, a shared understanding deeper than attraction. They talked for hours, about loneliness at the top, about children who only called when they needed something, about love that turned transactional the moment wealth entered the room. Clara admitted why she'd been testing men quietly, showing up as ordinary, hoping someone would choose her without knowing her balance sheet. "I don't need someone to save me," she said. "I just want someone who stays." Henry nodded slowly. "I buried my wife 12 years ago," he said. "Since then, I've been surrounded by people, but alone in every way that counts. I stopped dating because I couldn't tell if they loved me or the security I represented." He met her eyes. In that elevator, none of that existed. They walked again, the city glowing orange as the sun dipped low. Clara felt lighter, but fear still whispered in her ear. What if this was just another illusion? What if, once reality settled in, they'd become exactly what they were trying to escape. Henry stopped near a park bench and turned to her. "I don't want to rush this," he said, "and I don't want to pretend our lives are simple. But I do know this. I felt something real today." "Did you?" She nodded, tears blurring the lights. "I did." They sat together, not touching, just sharing the quiet. Days turned into weeks after that. They dated slowly, intentionally. No grand gestures, no luxury restaurants. Just walks, books, shared meals cooked badly and laughed over. They never asked for money from each other, never used it as leverage. And slowly, trust replaced fear. One evening, Henry invited Clara to a company event. She agreed, heart pounding. When they arrived, whispers followed her. Someone recognized her. Someone always did. She braced herself, waiting for Henry to pull away, to see her differently under the fluorescent lights of reality. Instead, he took her hand and introduced her simply as the woman who makes my life quieter in the best way. Months later, sitting on that same park bench, Henry asked her to marry him. No ring flashed, no audience watched, just a simple question asked by a man who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. Clara said yes through tears and laughter, knowing this time was different. Not because of money, but because of honesty earned in the dark. If this story touched you, if you've ever wondered whether real love still exists beyond titles and bank accounts, let me know in the comments what you believe. Like the video if you felt something, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe if you want more stories that remind us what really matters.